So basically, all these issues and challenges that were discussed all these days are also present. So we need much more alignment of our education with the real needs of the markets. And our biggest challenge, especially being let's say a small state that we have only 650,000 citizens in Montenegro, is how to prepare them to be ready for global market. Because in Montenegro we are highly dependent in our economy, business being so small, on foreign investments in this moment, and it's going to happen in the future. So we have to do this much faster than, I don't know, bigger companies or bigger countries or developing nations. So that's the basic, and also private universities started 7 years ago. That was good, established first private university in Montenegro. Now there are a few of them, but still in elementary school and preschool there is not enough private or public-private partnership. At the moment, there is no existing private elementary school, and there is huge potential in seeing, because the Montenegro position and everything is attractive. I talked last night with the ambassador of United Arab Emirates in Montenegro, and I asked her, because I was to present this, and I was expecting more from the United Arab Emirates, but anyway, I asked her what's, let's say, in her opinion, unique selling proposal of Montenegro in the global market. And she was telling me that it is, and we are experiencing that, and it is confirming our experience also as a country and let's say Atlas Foundation and Atlas Group as a business corporation, and that is that Montenegro is like becoming regional hub. So, because, okay, we were part of Yugoslavia and all the Balkan mess that was happening, but we never went directly in war, either in Croatia, either with Serbia. So for them it's much easier now to communicate through us. Then Turkey is coming and investing more and more in Montenegro. They want to establish universities in Montenegro, to send their students and to collect students from Middle East, to send them to study in Montenegro, because Montenegro has 20% of the Muslim population that went through all this mess again in Balkans without any problems in Montenegro and everything. So this is basically, let's say, Montenegro is like a little Dubai of that region. And then having the close access to the Europe and 50 minutes flights from Rome and everything. So that's, let's say, our advantage. And that's something that we should build up upon. And there is more and more, because I'm dealing with projects like this, there are more and more requests from, especially from Turkish big universities, in order to establish this kind of faculties. And as I was saying, all things that were mentioned these days are also facing Montenegro. So we need lifelong learning. It's not enough in power. Skills and training still, and now we are facing changing economy. We have to go more and more in service. From ex-Yugoslavia, we have leftovers, let's say, in big production, like aluminium companies, steel, that are totally unsustainable businesses, and we have to make this workforce skilled for new challenges. And there is still, in this field, there is a cool field in Montenegro because still no one is, government understand that it's needed to be done, but there are still not enough activities in this region. And they are ready for public-private partnership, because we have a few of public-private partnership with the governments in healthcare, in education, and basically I think Montenegro is a case study for yes, for all this.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure we'll learn some new things about Montenegro. And just to be very mindful that we have an agenda to try and agree a skills strategy around government. Whether the top area has said comments they'd like to country that is in a session stages, reinventing its position as an educational hub by the sounds of it. It's very keen to do this in partnership with international institutions as well, which seems to be a big feature. So please,
I was interested specifically with the government control of, so obviously you're attracting foreign business now, for the whole system. How much control does the government have on that in terms of the money going out? So around more or less.
Very good thing is because by opening negotiation with the European Union, we are Montenegro is opening itself to more funds. So and then mostly European funds come from World Bank, and they want to invest heavily in human capacity because they are understanding that. They make always request to be either public-private partnership or to be some private activities, or always with most often the best way is to get these funds with aligning yourself with some institution, international, European institution that is already experienced in this field. So this is making much more governmental input to be enough in order to push for new legislation and everything, but not too much, making feel for everyone. We are working with Atlas Group, Finnish consulting group. They are quite present, I think, because they have they easily approach all these funds. They have, let's say, CV working with these institutions like World Bank and European Bank, so it makes for us easier. So in Montenegro, they understand that they need international partners for us. And especially because we don't have so skilled workforce, and there are not so many of them. So for us, in everything, it's much easier. We learn this to have to bring the companies people with the experience, and then to get their know-how.
Is that so there's not going to be part of partnership in education? Is that because it's stable? What's the standard government schedule?
Because it wasn't, let's say, it wasn't needed and it wasn't understood. Because 5 years now, at this moment, all elementary and secondary school are only public, only run by government. It's not forbidden, but it's too small market in order to establish like private. There was one private secondary school, I think, but it wasn't sustainable. But the story about Montenegro, and we know and experience this as the group that is present in diverse businesses, is always to take this kind of regional path. Because if you establish some kind of elementary and even secondary school that is going to attract more people from Bosnia, also Kosovo, and people still like to send their kids to some other place. And Montenegro is familiar, we have the same language, we have the same constitution of minorities, let's say it's close, so there is this kind of potential feeling about Montenegro. And we as a country like to host ourselves like this.
So can I just comment on that, just ask into what you feel you need in terms of the skills and I suppose qualifications, so what you really expected now, what kind of skills you feel that you need in terms of pandemic follow-up?
Yes, more skills in new technology tech, and more skills in IT, and because generally tourism is a main activity in the country. And let's say we are quite experienced because we have done this for, I don't know, forever. But definitely new technology and understanding how through the technology we can more easily participate in, let's say, global economy better. So that's
Thank you. I'm going to now ask Roy to introduce you who is Director of Delivery and has been involved in education skills business for quite a while. In the UK and once upon a time training and enterprise councils, which were set up specifically to bring skills providers, training providers, and industry together in various economic regions to encourage generation. Sorry, talk to us a little bit about your experience. I know you've got a presentation.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting when you told me about it yesterday. So if you feel you want to show it, do so.
Is it worth doing?
Yes, so we'll, mix it up a bit. Great. Yeah, going.
The good thing about doing a presentation is you remember what you said you were going to say, is it? That's the benefit of it. What are we talking about?
Exactly. Good 11 minutes.
Okay, great. So I thought because it was very early in the morning, I thought I'd be a little bit provocative and just start off with something that might generate a discussion. So I just thought, talking about the UK, the UK, as many of you know, will spend millions and millions, hundreds of millions of pounds a year on vocational training. And I have a perspective that an awful lot of that is waste, which is quite contentious because actually, if you go through the middle, you'll find vocational training all the way through the core of what I do. So I thought I'd start off by what motivates me. Well, my dad, this is my dad here. This handsome chap here, is me, obviously a few years ago. But my dad was 52 years as a plumber. So he left school at 14, was a plumber the whole of his life until he retired. In comparison, I've had 7 jobs and 4 different careers and different things. And Tom, my 12-year-old son, he's at school at the moment and he's being trained for careers that actually most probably don't exist yet, because the school is having to prepare him for things that 5 years ago or 10 years ago none of us had heard of, a web designer or a social media expert and so Tom's being prepared in school by teachers that are doing their best to prepare him for a world of work which we don't quite know what that means. But actually, I believe vocational training is the best thing since sliced bread. I left school with no qualifications. I suffer with dyslexia, so life for me is a life of pictures. I don't read and write very well at all. Never been to university, I have no qualifications. But vocational training offered me a career path and an opportunity to demonstrate that I had achieved a level of competency that gave people comfort that maybe I was ready to take on particular roles in particular businesses. So I'm a great advocate of vocational training, but we've had this in the introduction a number of times, so I won't reiterate it, but 61 million children out of primary school, 1 million people have no primary education.
blah, blah, blah. And the cost of, Ban Ki-moon saying the cost of leaving millions of children and young people on the margin of society is far greater than the funds required to jumpstart efforts to reach international goals for education. However, money's tight. And actually, I always like to remind myself that governments don't have any money of their own. Governments only have what we pay as taxes to governments. And having knocked on doors for a number of different election campaigns and asked people and waiting to hear the Liberal Democrats say, well, we're very happy to pay an extra penny in the pound, and I say, well, that's great. So if you tell me what you earn, and we'll work out what your penny in the pound would be on your tax, and you write me a cheque for that, and we can bank that cheque on your behalf, and I go, well, I'm only paying if everyone's paying it. And actually, none of us really like paying higher taxes, in reality. And money's tight. So if we've got all this work to do, but money's tight and there isn't much around, what do we do? Well, actually, you look at the money that's been spent on vocational training, millions and millions of it is being wasted. Certainly in the UK, and I'm sure in other places in the world that we have similar dysfunctions. We have business in many different parts of the world, and I've got experience of working in 80 different countries around the world. Quite extensively on consultancy with governments and looking at the money that's wasted. Why is it wasted? So I've just pulled up six simple reasons. There's a huge misalignment of the money that's spent on vocational training to where the labour market is. An example of that, in a previous role I worked for the government, and I was asked to go along and close down a training provider in Liverpool. And we'd warned the training provider for years and years that the £500,000 a year they were getting off the government wasn't being spent wisely, and we'd gone through the process. Anyway, it finally came to meeting up with the board, and I went along with a sort of cease trading notice to tell them we were no longer going to be getting any more taxpayers' money. And the chairman said, you know what, Roy, we just don't get it. Please explain to us why you're doing this. I said, well, for example, you trained 100 young men from Merseyside last year to be welders, and a particular type of welding they were teaching. He said, yeah. And the training director said, yes, and every single one of them got a certificate. I said, you're right, every single one of them got a certificate. I said, the difficulty we've got is none of them got a job. And the training director went, exactly. And I went, no, exactly. None of them got a job. So it was lovely that we trained all these people to do this job, but none of them got a job. And he banged the table and he said to me, what you don't understand is, you'll never understand. I said, tell me what it is I don't understand then. He said, what you don't understand is nobody wants those welders anymore. I was like, that's why I'm closing you down. I said, they want hairdressers, they want call centre people, they want, Costa Coffee baristas, they want. Those are the jobs that are there, and actually, because you've got that curriculum, because you train as trainers in that, because you've got the equipment set up, you're continuing to train people that actually are not required by the labour market anymore. And so, so much of the money that we spend as governments around the world is on training. Vocational training, yes, it's good, but it's not aligned to the labour market. So I've got some potential very quick solutions for some of this. The existing transferable skills are not recognised. We do the sheep dip. So people come in, they have a range of talents and skills and expertise from the previous life. We say, that's great. We wipe all that out, we put them on a 2-year programme to teach them to be something else. 40% of actually what they're going to learn, they've most probably accumulated in their previous life experiences already. So we don't use accreditation of prior learning. Much of the training that we're delivering to people is out of date. If you look at the UK, we still put people through Sitting Guilds 7061, 7062 catering qualifications, which means that the young people going to a 3-year catering college will still spend 4 weeks learning to ice carving, icing cakes, beer tapping, whatever, which is great. But then when they get the job in the local restaurant or local pub, and the first thing the chef said is, you need to make 60 stinky pies for lunchtime, the poor people are still not capable of meeting the requirements of the labour market. Training elements like the ice carving are not required for particular types of employment. We've got the Chalk and Talk team over here, and then we've got the team that have met the technology salesmen over here. And this isn't no longer relevant for teaching one-to-many, and kids and young people today are expecting much more techno-savvy ways of learning. But also at this end, I've never been shown around so many premises with so many empty IT suites in my life. The keyboard's all there, and the sim screen's all set up, and the server in the corner, and one person demonstrating to me, what the capability is. But actually, the whole of the IT suite, and the next one, and the next one, the next one, completely empty. It's certainly locked up at 5 o'clock at night and not open at weekends. And then we've got a lack of internationally recognised qualifications, increasingly, particularly, no better place to demonstrate it here than Dubai. We live in a world where, labour barriers are greatly reduced and people want to have a certificate in their hand that's recognised around the world. So that's where the money gets wasted. Smart skills investment, therefore, as well. As we're trialling in the UK at the moment, payment for skills only after sustained employment for 12 months. People say to me, yes, but how do you align the skills to vocational skills market so that it meets the needs of the labour market? Well, actually, start paying skills providers 12 months after the individual's gone into a job for 12 months. And what you'll find is the whole skills market cranks its way towards where the labour market is going to really provide employment for people. Have diligent accreditation of prior skills so that we don't have to retrain people. It's not only is it wasteful of money, it's demoralising to the candidates and the individuals when they know they already know something and they're being asked to attend a lesson to relearn what they already know, rather than just being able to have that qualification signed off. As we have in the UK sector skills councils, but also Canada, Australia, and in India where we work, sector skills councils trying to ensure that only qualifications funded by the taxpayer are signed off by employers. And instead of delivering whole qualifications, there are more, what we need to move to increasingly is what I call slithers of training, where the individuals are given a qualification that's relevant to the labour market, so much as if you go into somewhere and you get trained for 3 days to be a Starbucks barista, you can walk around most cities in the UK and walk straight into a job that day if you had a Starbucks barista certificate, or if you're a quick fit fitter, or if you're and we need to train people around job titles rather than academic underappreciations of 2-year vocational training programmes. We need to have customer-driven processes using technology as opposed to technology-driven programs. Technology-driven programs usually have huge budgets and empty rooms, whereas customers are telling us what technology they want that fits around them is better. And skills passports, photo IDs, fingerprints. In India, we deliver programs with vocational skills linked to simple passports linked to a central database, the photo and the fingerprint, so the individual knows what they are trained in, and so does the employer. So, I'm going to hand over in a second to Andrew, but he's going to quickly just give you some more information about Pitman training, the inventors of shorthand. We've been trading for 175 years.
Looking good on it.
Yeah.
We teach T-line these days anyway.
Well, and it's gone on from that. Now what we teach as well is speed writing. So, if you can text, when the kids can text, we've got lots of people now coming in not wanting the short end of the T-line, but actually wanting to be able to still do the speed writing students, etc. Delivery through a franchise model, delivering job-ready people for the office and the employers, modern office skills, putting people right at the heart of being able to influence the business, because as many men and women appreciate, they're half the person they are when their PA or their executive assistant isn't around. And I'll hand over there. I think, Andrew, you just want to, just for a few minutes, just talk about the Pitman bit.
42.
Yes.
It would be great to get some participation at this point on what we just heard from Rob, who's the
big in this business for a while.
Too long.
I thought it was a great presentation, thanks Roy. One thing that springs to mind is, that you didn't bring up, but is apprenticeship, which is of course the link from training to employment. So, you know, I used to work for an organisation that trained unemployed youth in this region in the Middle East, but we work with employers, so every training was linked to a job at the end of it. That's basically just old-fashioned apprenticeship. And my understanding, Europe is not my area, but Germany has very established and successful apprenticeship programs. Wasn't going back to old-fashioned apprenticeship a real opportunity?
Yeah, I think apprenticeships are a much healthier model. Yeah.
You talked about the lack of internationally recognised skills qualification, but is that a problem all over the world, or is there such a qualification that just used?
Well, I think people recognise the sitting guilds. People recognise the Microsoft. People recognise an Edexcel. Those qualifications have sufficient brand. We were amazed. We went to India, and honestly, not a word of a lie, we must have met in the week 30 different people, and it was bizarre. Every single one of them knew a pitman. So it's that's what I mean by it has to be said. It can't be Eddie's, the barber's hairdressing, because when they transfer from Chennai into Dubai, it's not recognised. It doesn't give value. It's already entered here rather than being able to turn into here. So, and also this idea of using the technology today, being able to give them something which they can carry, which somebody can. We have a very small card they can slot into the computer using a small USB, and it immediately comes up on the ILO website, identifying that person. This is what we've been trained in.
Is that the passport? Is that the passport idea that you were mentioning?
Yeah. So that the labour force can move, and they can move with the confidence that the employer of the destination where they're going will validate and value the qualification that they've got.
I'm sorry, can I ask about that? Is that just a pitman thing, or is that? You mentioned the ILO, but how? Can other training institutions or anything tap into that?
Yeah. And it's like a business card, but it has a very tiny USB at the end. So as soon as it goes in, it immediately brings up a web page with their details on.
Hi, Lloyd, thank you for that. Just bringing it back to K-12,
Yes.
very early ages of
Yes.
skills training and so on.
Yes.
To what extent do you agree with the proposals, especially in the UK at the moment, to make programming more so?
Well, most probably, like you, I spent too much time in a room with ministers, and it just reminds me of 1984 when I remember being in a room with a Conservative minister and saying, what, my daughter's learning these bloody computer things, and every young person should have them. And before you know it, you've got a £400 billion computer program, or we've got Tony Blair's Millennium program where he thinks everything's going to stop at 1999, 2000. I think the introduction of programming into K-12 for kids is wonderful, providing you put the right kids on that opportunity and it's aligned to what their needs are and where the opportunities are in the market. So if it's in the Hebrides, it may be more or less useful. If it's in rural Anglesey, it may be more or less useful. If it's in a city, London or Manchester, or in the media city in Salford, fantastic. It has to be aligned to where the likelihood of the market. Now you can get people in the Hebrides because the fibre optics being able to work in programming, but I just worry about broad brush programs. Everything for everyone. That's all.
Proposed curriculum that's very broad.
Yeah, and a huge amount of money. And then what? When it comes to the waste, I don't know. Shoot me down, but You come up with that programme, the 400 million gets put aside, the civil servants start off in April, May, June, July, then they go on holiday, then they come back in September, realise the money hasn't been spent, then they start to panic, then they go off for Christmas and really panic, then they come back in January and start throwing the money out the window, and then there's a wholesale sale till March, and then 20% of budget.
You missed out on issuing an invitation to tender on the 23rd of December, deadline on the 1st of January.
And then the money doesn't get spent, and then the minister says, oh, right, well, that was rubbish. Tell you what, we're going to teach them all this time crocheting. 400 million into crocheting, and we're off again on the same hurdy-gurdy, so it just gets lost in the bureaucracy and red tape. And
No, that's great, thank you. It's rare to get an answer so grounded.
But coding in school's got to be, it's got to be a great opportunity. I computer programming in school. This was 30 odd years ago, but the devices then weren't really in the home. They were big ugly home.
I think that's the key word, opportunity rather than obligation.
Right.
yes, yeah.
Chris. Well, on the topic of bureaucracy, because I thought it was a great presentation, and I loved all of it apart from two positives. One of them, I'm just curious to understand. Really, you were mentioning India. I know that India appear to be busy importing vocational qualification system, bits of which we're busy moving away from. And my experiences in India have been that bits of it are beautiful in the sense of people can go and get a piece of training, really quite a short burst of training, maybe just a few days even, in textiles to learn to sew in a straight line.
Yeah.
They can go to the local factory and put bread on the table, and because they're getting their training in a very short burst, the individual can afford to pay for it. And I have a bit of a horror about the whole panoply of sector skills councils and all that coming in. Dollops on top of that is actually exactly what you were saying about programming. There's all those employers sitting around the table, and let's face it, this is a country that has a lot of bureaucracy and doesn't do it well. Could kill that very vibrant aspect of the market. How do we...
India is just an amazing environment, isn't it? I go twice a month to India. I've done 160 visits to India. It's just India and skills is just. It's like working amongst the most disorganised chaos. But wow, what an opportunity! And so what I've realised is, and I'll give the example of the primary care for me, that sometimes you have to ladle in nonsense, but it's part of the progression towards the heavenly situation. So I was in India in January with Patricia Hewitt, the ex-Secretary of State from the UK for Health, and with Samar from Wellcome Trust. And we're looking at, in the 12th five-year plan for India, implementing primary healthcare across India, which that's chaos. 1,300 million people, and the government has decided to implement that and put 3% of GDP into the delivery of that service. And one of the things that they're doing, which struck horror when the guy started to do the first presentation, he said, what we're going to do is, we're going into the village and we're going to get all the medicine people, which, don't print this, but, however you want to describe it, the witch doctor or the local medicine man or the person that rubs sticks together or whatever. And we're going to get that person, and we're going to take them off site, we're going to take them away for a week, and we're going to train them in, basic medical whatever. And we're going to give them a suitcase, and we're going to put in it over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, and a mobile phone, and a digital camera, and a certificate for the wall. We're going to send them back to the village, and we're going to accredit them as being like a junior GP. And I went, oh my God! And he went, and actually, as they talked it through, they said, well, it's an important first step. So this guy now gets a certificate on the wall. He's able to charge more for the services that he's delivering. He takes a photograph of something that he sees that he doesn't quite understand. He rings the call centre. The call centre says, give them the bottle, the blue bottle. Blue bottle gets dispensed. He takes a couple of measurements and uses the phone to telemedicine back to the centre. And I was out with the Wellcome Trust people, and I said, gosh, that's amazing. And they went, really? And I went, yes. Where on earth did you think of that? And they went, how do you think we did it in the UK? I went, what do you mean? I said, well, when we introduced primary healthcare in the UK in the 1800s, 1700s, how do you think it started out? And so the sector skills, I think you have to introduce things which we now have run their course in the UK, but serve an important part of the evolutionary process in a developing country.
Just to push on that, it's the sort of trade-off between something that can be very, very effective and efficient locally, because that employer knows that particular training provider do a good job and the one down the road don't, and therefore that's good enough for them. But I agree that individual has not got a qualification they can take anywhere else, because there's thousands of them and they just don't have it. But there is that trade-off, because for that individual, they may well not want to take it anywhere else. Strike that balance.
And I suppose it's a country like India where they reckon they have 47 million people surplus to requirement, and so they're looking to export 47 million people outside of the country.
Makes sense from that.
People that turn up in Dubai, and we saw them this morning on the bus, making their way across the road, 100 construction workers. If they've turned up with that level of qualification, they're going to be paid this, and they're going to get that level of status. If they turn up with nothing, then
from that perspective,
they're going to go in. And the jobs in the rural India, because of climate change, just aren't there.
Just wanted to unpick the recognition thing a little bit more detail. From a school perspective, we all agree that vocation is the way forward. That's where we want to go. However, there's no, at the moment, in this region particularly, in some areas, there's no real clear pathway. The governments don't recognise BTECs, they don't recognise certain skill-based qualifications. And ultimately, if a child is coming into a school here, or some areas of the world, when they actually then eventually go to, in terms of migration, as we talked about yesterday, people are going to be skills of mobility, moving around the world. When they have to apply for their work visa, they won't get a visa because they haven't got the right qualification, because that qualification hasn't been recognised by that government. So I'm interested, also in terms of Atlas Group and obviously Fitment, what are you doing to actually work with some of these decision makers to ensure that ultimately we would like to take on more vocational qualifications in the schools, particularly in this region. However, we're reluctant because of the nature of ultimately we're setting up our kids with no clear pathway beyond movers.
So you mean by this region, you mean the Middle East rather than Europe?
Yeah.
It's a negotiated trauma, isn't it? And some civil servants get it, and some politicians get it. Then they're moved to agriculture before we've had a chance to continue to implement something. And so I think it's an uphill battle, but it's a battle we've just got to all continue to be engaged in. And you'll get. And I think as you made the point with the apprenticeships, sadly, when my dad was a plumber and a master plumber, his vocational qualification was absolutely recognised and valued by everybody that lived in the community. But over the years, that's lost its way, and it's difficult now picking it back up. And you've got a 30-year group of adults.
Can I be contentious and ask if this is the role of the public sector? I mean, the Tata Group probably trains 200,000 people a year.
Yeah.
So, not necessarily.
Get out of the way and let companies do it. Procter & Gamble, they all understand they want their internal certification to be valuable to employees.
Are you going to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, can do.
About the commercial, if you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I mean, 175 years of history, and that heritage is sort of hugely important in what we do in the UK. And the interesting thing is, what we really do is we get people back into work. Sort of the statistics were up there that 77% of people get jobs after they finish a Pitman course. And most people that take Pitman courses, they're actually taking a Pitman certificate at the end. It's not a recognised qualification. But in the UK, that genuinely doesn't matter because it's recognised by employers. And that's the important thing, is that when the person's going in for a job, the training that they've had is specifically related to that job. So that's what the employer cares about, because they know that when they come in, day one, they can give that person this responsibility and they're ready to do it, instead of spending the next 3 months really training them into something that they wanted in the first place. So really that's what we do. In terms of sort of where we're focused, it's office and IT skills. in the UK, we're seeing tremendous opportunity for graduates that come to Pitman training, which is kind of a little bit perverse in a way, because you have someone who's gone on to do a degree and they end up with a degree in accounting or finance, and then come to Pitman training and say, I cannot find a job because everybody wants me to come in and do Sage, and no one's actually taught me how to use Sage software. So until I can do that, I can't even get a foot in the door. So what we do is we give them the actual sort of ready skills to do something like Sage. Internationally, tremendous opportunity, I think, again, because certainly within the Commonwealth, there's enormous recognition of Pitman training, far more so than a lot of the awarding bodies, even though it's not a qualification. There's sort of that recognition, feel that what they're doing has actually got value. That's it in a nutshell, no commercial.
Would you like to follow that up? A brand that's been outbound.
Could I just check I understood that the Pitman certificate isn't sort of in the national framework of qualifications, etc., and it's just got that currency because people know it.
Yeah, everything that we do...
It kind of goes back to what we were just saying.
Absolutely.
If it's good enough and the brand carries it, then...
People pay they're paying for the courses.
Yeah, I mean, we're a private organisation, we're a for-profit organisation, and everybody pays for it. I mean, we do have some circumstances where we have partnerships with government in the UK. I'm looking at umpteen different opportunities internationally. There's a colleague of mine that's in Libya at the moment speaking to the government to see if we can arrange a deal with them to provide reskilling to a country that has no skills that are modern for a modern workforce. But yeah, no, there's no... Everything we do is mapped to a qualification, so that if someone wants to, they can sit an OCR exam at the end of it and get a certificate without doing any training. Because actually what we deliver is far above and beyond what is required in the syllabus. But the actual reality is most people, an awful lot of people that we have, they actually get work before they even finish the course, because they can put it on their CV that they're working towards this. They find a job, and at the end of it, they might have come in and said, I want a certificate in this qualification. Reality is 90% of them don't at the end because they get the job, and that's what they really truly care about.
Can I just add something to that? We're the complete opposite end of this, and it's a great brand. I'm from Debate, and we run this bizarre debate program, but we run it to make kids employable, all the skills that the kids end up with transferable skills, but we work in very poor areas, so we work in demographic where most of the kids live below the poverty line. The brand's really good, and what we found now is that, to our surprise, big global companies that fund us come to us and they say, we want your kids, we'll take any of them into our workforce, because they're so amazing, they're so work ready when they come through, and our brand is often, in fact they've done our course, is often the only qualification they'll come out of school with. So we're in a situation where we need to have that accredited at some point. But
sorry, what's the brand again?
It's called Debate Mate.
Debate Mate.
But it's not in terms of status and longevity and where you kids are what.
And it's about debate, is it?
It's a debating program, but it's developed. We always say it's not about debate. It's about transferable skills that make you young kids employability.
Right, great.
Well, we're going to, sorry. I'm just going to call on my good friend and colleague, Herve Marchet, lately joined James from Apple, where he was director for this region. He's specialising in the education business. And I've asked Herve to reflect a little on the whole skills requirement in the technology industry. You've heard an enormous amount from Tony Blair onwards from the beginning of this conference about the need for technology woven into everything that we do, and for digital media to be preeminent in all of our thoughts. And really, it would be great to hear from you, Herve, somebody who is of that industry, who has joined us to enable us to participate more fully in it, to reflect on what it is that you think are going to be requirements nationally. And bearing in mind, we're putting together our skills agenda, which Dusko is faithfully annotating over there. Herve, talk
thank
to
you.
us.
So I will do a little bit of, yesterday I was very impressed by Dr. Zakaria, so I will do a little bit of pessimistic and then I will do a little bit of optimistic. So the pessimistic, even if I love my country, will start by some of the French example. Just for your information, I don't know if you know, but there was no teacher reform in France since 1950. And each minister that tried to reform the status of the teacher gets fired. So that's just by the street, by the people in the street. However, these few things that did happen, especially in vocational, because there's a long tradition of apprentice, in France. And I will jump after to the IT and why it's important. So the first thing, what I will call the wow effect, we have seen in some of these presentations, the recognition. But for many years, there was, we call that, we are not modest in France, so when you finish your high school, you have the baccalaureate. So that's not exactly the same in most of the country. But very often, when it was vocational, it was then certificate. And in fact, there was a kind of non-recognition for the kids to go to vocational because if you were generic and kind of academic, you have a baccalaureate. And if you were knowing a job, you were almost not recognizing. There was no way to continue study, meaning that maybe you want to have a job, but maybe you want to continue studies, and it was impossible. So this reform has been made. Very positive. So the kids, they can go up to year 13, have the baccalaureate, technical baccalaureate, and continue university. They want to have a job, they have a job. So it was the first very positive thing. The issue of that is that they didn't decide on what was available for the kids versus what was needed on the market. They decided versus what kind of teacher they do have. So if they have mechanic teachers, they need 25 kids by mechanic teacher. And they put the kids at 14, 15, 16 years old in a kind of a path, a learning path that would bring to mechanic, which now most of the cars are electronics. So you don't need a mechanic because you don't go and enter the engine, you need to try, you need to test. And I think there's a big disconnect between the training and the needs on the market. So that was very important. Then they wanted to talk about technology, to give some certificates, so they call that CII, BII, so in French we call that C2I, B2I. And in fact, they cannot give the certificates to the kids and to use a computer. But it's not to use a computer, it's what is mouse, what is a screen, what is a CPU. When the kids are laughing, when they go there, they say, what do I need to know? And there's a big joke in France because I don't know, the mouse in French, and we have another small animal, which is mulot, and the French president was trying that, and instead of calling that a mouse, call that a mulot, and everybody was thinking, wow, if that's the guy that decides about the kids, it's going to be an issue, but it's becoming a kind of a law. And I think it was a wake-up call to say to these people, we don't need this kind of certification that goes nowhere. We need a real training. And I like your point to say that a lot of these kids, they didn't even finish. If they found a job before to finish, they go for the job. And definitely we have that. So that was a little bit the French example. But we are very optimistic. I don't know if you know why the rooster is the animal for France now, because that's the only animal that can sing the feet in the... Sorry for my English. So I think we are quite optimistic normally. So if I come back to IT, and I think that it's understood now that you don't need IT skill as such. You need to be able to do something with the technology. So I agree with you. You see a lot of this, open lab with really no usage. One of the things that I've seen now in schools or the school in France, so primary they are owned in terms of management by the city. College, which is 6th grade to 9, something like that, by the department, and other is by the region. And in fact, they start to open the labs to parents. They start to open the labs so kids that can come. They start to have, in fact, reverse training, meaning that the senior people that come to these labs and are trained by the kids. And in fact, what we start to see is that this interaction, and you give a purpose to engage with the computer outside of the Facebook, the gaming, and then they give to the kids, you are going to train older person, retired person, to use computer, to do Skype with the grandkids that are. And in fact, that's a real training of usage. And it's quite efficient. Doesn't give a certificate as such very often, but it gives, the wow effect, the engagement, the collaboration. It's easy to use something. It's not easy to explain to someone. And these pedagogical skills for the kids then will be useful in the company when they will join the company. So now at higher level, most of the time, kids in university or in business school in France now they have to do a lot of, and I see, I was Apple for many years, but I recognize all of the Microsoft, Cisco certification, very good certification, and you start to see on the resume of kids, all of this certification. There is a value for that, and because it's employment ready, so you know that the person will be efficient right away in the company. When I started to work with the Cisco, the Net Novel certification, if I remember well, and when you were looking for novel engineer, up certification level 2, you found a job right away. And I think that's the kind of mechanic, and you were talking about these kind of things, that can bring the certification, and I totally agree with you that we need to have kind of international certification. There was this, for a while, this ECDL foundation, from Ireland. It was a driving license of the computer. I think the idea was quite good. It was not so successful because I think it was lacking a little bit of real pedagogical content. It was more kind of basic. But that's something that I'm convinced that in terms of international recognition, we should have.
Do we offer these kinds of parallel certifications in our schools?
We do. Increasingly, we are now. So, for example, we've been running Cisco IT networking now for the last 2 years. A lot of our schools in this region and beyond are now looking at those post-16. And I think, like Bill was talking about earlier, I think we have to be lower now, younger. There's a focus vocation-wise, post-16, potentially post-14. But it's almost sometimes now it's got to go lower than that. What we're doing to engage those children at that.
And we should have apps development on Android, on Windows, on iOS. We should start to have this kind of opportunity.
Are you going to say something? No, you're just looking like you.
No, sorry.
I have a general thing to throw out about vocational training or even tech skills training, which I heard from someone else. I'm paraphrasing. This is an argument someone made about the US, but so I'm curious if it applies to the rest of the world, which was in the 70s and 80s, they had the same conversations, where they said there's a big mismatch between available jobs and skills. And this is a professor at Wharton said this, and actually when you looked at the salaries of most of the skills gaps, they were just priced too low. But it wasn't actually a skills gap, it was a cheapness factor. The companies just didn't actually want to pay a lot for a lot of skills they needed, which is why the outsourcing industry essentially developed. A lot of programming is just done cheaply around the world, and this is still true of the IT sector. Does anyone agree with that? This is interesting.
No, I just have another comment. Because I think also you talked about the skills that I needed, and you don't know what jobs are coming up, but the skills that I needed are really hard to measure. And we are actually trying to, I don't know if it will ever happen, but making this new PISA 2, PISA second, the real piece, the real life, and making creativity and innovation and all that. Because I think it's really hard when you cannot measure what we need. So
but shouldn't
there's
it be
another
industry?
thing for the, what?
Shouldn't it be industry that decides that rather than the public sector? Because what we have is certifications and stuff. It's decided by people that aren't employing.
Yeah.
No one's actually saying to the employers, what do you want? Like, what skills do you want?
Better just giving, instead of the, 400 million program, just give tax breaks to companies that have big training programs.
But it's It's like I was horrified in Spain. Spain unemployment's 25.2%. 52% of all young people are under 25 is unemployed, and the government spends 7.2 billion euros a year on skills training. And you talk to
Egypt.
you talk to so many of the unemployed people, and they will have a certificate for a hairdresser, and have a certificate for a bricklayer, and have a certificate for a plasterer. But they say, where do you live? And they live out in the rural community where they need these new technology skills to grow things that they weren't needing to grow before. Because after climate change, they now need to grow different type of crops. But they have a whole raft of different 2-year courses they've been on.
I mean, people may know this better. My understanding, Ireland in the 90s was Intel got great tax breaks and set up great training centres, made a huge region. So.
Yes, sorry, can I just say something? I think we've got a serious mismatch between qualifications and skills at the moment. Serious mismatch. And I think the qualifications we've got, many of them are 10 years old and 5 years old. And what we need is bite-sized qualifications. And actually, we've got that mechanism in Europe because we've got the European Qualifications Framework, which will allow organisations, including employers, to develop their own skills certification and have it mapped to the EQF, the European Qualifications Framework. And I think we've also got another issue, and I think Herve is absolutely right on this, that in fact we talk a lot about employability skills. We talk about employability skills in the enormous great vacuum. We're going to do employability skills today in the curriculum. And a lot of the employability skills are about problem solving, working together, collaboration, creativity, etc., etc. And actually the kids are doing this online all the time. They're doing it through social media, they're doing it absolutely every day, and we're not thinking out of the box about how we use what they're already doing as a matter of course effectively in the classroom. Part of it's to do with the fact that teachers are quite fearful of some things. Part of the fact is just not thought about it. There have been a couple of quite interesting schemes in Europe over the last couple of years as well, which is a slightly different thing, whereby some of the very hard to reach unemployed youth, instead of herding them into an institution and diagnosing what's wrong with them, we know that what's wrong with them, they're disengaged. People have actually been going into where they congregate, gyms, discos, those are the DJs, etc., and helping them to observing them in the workplace, seeing the kind of skills they've got, and actually then saying, in actual fact, you have got these skills, we can actually certify you for these skills, and diagnosing their skills in the places where they currently congregate. And using the EQF to map that against that's a very small piece of learning. And all of a sudden they've got an ology. Those of you that are quite old may remember an advert in the UK some years ago where Miriam, what's the name? Anyway,
it's got an ology.
Yeah, oh, you've got an ology. Don't worry, you've got an ology. The kid had thought it failed all his GCSEs. You've got an ology, that's great. And actually what they need is something to give them that confidence that they're not failures and that they have something to contribute. And I think we've got the whole thing twisted around the wrong way, focusing all the time on big qualifications.
So are we kind of concluding here in the Europe session skills that in actual fact we should be in our new school strategy persuading governments to reverse out of this arena altogether and to take a far more free market industry driven approach which will, as it were, find its own level in terms of what the requirements are? Because it is hugely confusing. Because all employers say, certainly in the UK, we don't understand what's going on, it's all really difficult, it's all changing all the time, all of this. And it's always been like that, as long as I've been involved in it.
You've got to say where I've got to go here. There's a time and a place. We've got to get the maths, we've got to get the science, we've got to get the maths, we've got to get the English or the language right, I can say.
But we have a school system for that, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Yes. But we should be contextualising some of these other things through those core subjects as well. So now we're doing maths, and by the way, now we're going to do a bit of something else where you measure. You might as well put the two together and make it much more contextual.
Well, there's curricular change, sorry. Curricular change is important. I mean, when I was at school, I learned algebra, which is relatively useless for mathematics in most professions, but you don't actually learn statistics, which allows you to do probability and calculate risk. Calculating risk is very useful in almost all professions. So there's definitely curricular change.
If the solution is the government getting out of the way and employers just recognising and using qualifications, then why does that happen now? No, there's nothing
So it's happening in France, for instance. So it's where I'm not totally in agreement. I think I came from what we call a Hegelian, so a kind of central government that's imposed, and I'm not against that overall. If it's well done. We have that in France. They gave the authorization to students that didn't go to higher degree to do what they call alternate. So 15 days in a company, 15 days at school. I think it's a fantastic project. Companies don't use it. Companies don't want these guys. And I'm receiving, when I was at Apple, I was receiving a lot of resumes. Try to convince my company that it's a fantastic opportunity to have these kids, because very often they have maybe, 1 or 2 years after the high school. They have a good start of basic. They can spend 2-3 years in a company, learn about the company, but the company didn't like the model. They are scared that the kids, they were not engaged, and they will not be engaged enough in the study, not be engaged enough in the company. So, and I think that if it's not enforced by a kind of a legal structure and it's too liberal, companies don't do it because it takes time, it takes some energy, and should certainly link with real, because the company is not good to training, but maybe we should have within the company partners to do some of the training or school. You're right, it does exist, but it doesn't work so much. It's not a fact of we need to have a balance. It should not be one extreme to another. It should be in between.
Yes, I wanted to make maybe similar point. I think also that government should be looking from point of view from Montenegro, but with whole and all this discussion that the government should have a bigger picture. Should make everyone understand business and citizen what is the future strategy. It should always press with legislation, with everything in this sense, and then then let private business, NGOs, and everyone work on that field. But they should always, for example, now stress what's the benefits for everyone, every citizen, make them understand what are benefits of new technologies, whatever. And I think your point was great because about how to learn new technologies. I have my aunt who never touched computer, but her daughter went to New York, and then she learned to use Skype because she needed Skype. And after Skype, she went to all these things. So this is the role of government, making me understand in a way I can understand why I need it, and then someone else is going to provide. That's my.
You wanted to?
No, well, I'm from Denmark, and I think we actually do well. and I just want to tell you that the government in Denmark invited the companies to join the new Nordic school, and they also invited Sweden and Norway and Finland and whoever wants to join. But so are developing this together, and I would be really scared to say that the government should not be in charge because we like them to be in charge, and I think it's also to secure proper education. But the invitation, we got it, and most of the companies actually took it. So we are all developing the Danish school system together. And we're also focusing a lot on teacher colleges, because that's also where it starts, and that's where we want to make a change, because when they come out, they are so behind before they actually meet the kids. And I think our government is really good at facilitating that public-private partnership. And I think that's where we can make a change, if we help them facilitate that. Yeah.
Well, I've been debating whether I should or shouldn't, but I'll ask it, but I won't ask to anybody to answer the question, including ourselves. But what always pops into my mind at this, towards the end of the discussion is, we're all intellectually and academically, resolving around the same place. And then if we had to write down on a piece of paper how many young apprentices Pitman employs, how many young people GEMS employs on apprentice, how many people in the Times have got on apprenticeship programs, how many people that Denmark government's got on apprenticeship programs, or the enterprise agency, that's the embarrassing bit, because if I had to write it down, the number that I'd write down on a piece of paper I wouldn't be proud of. And yet we all know the academic and the intellectual
Well, I mean, that is an important, possibly not rhetorical question, and on which to, I'm going to ask Chris Kirk to just summarise and lay out for us the key components.
Two, not one.
Because I think, I hope you'll agree, I mean, it has been a small group, but I feel that all of you have contributed in a very significant way to that. Thank you very much. And I think we benefited hugely from reflections from Montenegro, from France, and from the UK, and from your contributions to your various countries. And thank you very much for that. I hope you have got something from this session. So, Chris, would you just like to just outline for us, very briefly, because coffee beckons, what you think the kind of #1 skills strategy should be, and how we should define it as
like going on holiday.
No pressure. I think I will, and start. It's answering William's question, which is there a role for government? Let's start with that. Let's start from the assumption that there shouldn't be a role for government unless there has to be. It's all going to be. Now, there is classically market failure in the area of skills. There always has been in every country. There probably always will be. Because there's a kind of a benefit that accrues to society that isn't just the benefit to the individual and the employer. And there's also an issue of agency in terms of getting the funding to get the training to give the person the job. Now, in very large and developed industries like the construction industry, they can come together, form a construction industry training board, take a levy off the top, which has been an endless source of woe, and then at one point it was all done through the Sector Skills Council, and that didn't work very well either, so now it's back as a levy. But at least for those large industries, they've got some hope of, if you like, kind of the industry almost acting as government. But there are lots of industries that aren't like that and are hard to bring together. So I think there is a role for government in terms of setting the framework. And let's remember, even in Sue's example, there was a European qualifications framework. Government was involved to make that framework happen. So in terms of setting some frameworks, in terms of equity and efficiency, the government has to have some role. And it has to make sure, for example, that the poorest in society are still able to access the skills they need to get a job, which if we left it entirely to the market, employers are not going to pay to train people who are some distance from what they need. They'll pay people who are the closest, or ideally, if you're an employer, not pay for the training at all, but we'd like to have that done by somebody else. So government has a role in setting a framework. Beyond that, I've done months of analysis and come up with a manifesto for skills. I refer you to an earlier slide. This is probably it if we just add the small but fundamental role for government of setting the framework within which that happens. Then I don't think we've said anything that stops all of those being and it saves me coming up with a new one too.
A very fine summary, if I may say so. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to this session. You will remember it, as you'll know each other really well as a result of coming here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.